So, Debbie, I think a lot about language, right? And we've talked about this a little bit. I feel strongly that it's important, to in specific situations that I'm not using gendered language with my kids. So I always say server. I don't say waitress. I don't want them, especially because they're two boys, I don't want them to see like certain roles as gendered. But one thing that I've really, really struggled with in my life is that you guys is such a New York thing to say. And I don't think anyone around me really cares if I call them you guys, even if it's entirely a group of women. But it's one of those like corporate things where they're like, oh, you shouldn't say that. And you should use y'all instead because that's not gendered. But I
Who
I
would have
cannot
thought?
say y'all without feeling like I sound like a total poser.
Well, you do say it kind of funny.
Of course I do. Like,
You
like that
say
doesn't surprise me at all.
you it's funny because you're a very fast talker, but with y'all, you say y'all, just like a
What am I
punchy
doing wrong?
y'all, just
Y'all,
y'all,
y'all. Just
y'all.
say y'all.
Yeah, you get
Yeah.
right to that L, y'all. I think that
All
you're
right.
trying to elongate the A, so
We'll work on this again in the future.
yeah.
Let's get into it.
Traditional etiquette says that politics, religion, and money should never be brought up in polite company. And we're here to discuss all three. I'm Debbie Hancock, a conservative and a Christian living in the Deep South.
I'm Arielle Gorin, a born and raised New Yorker and a liberal Jew. We're asking the hard questions and actually listening to what the other has to say.
Is Anybody Listening podcast starts now.
Okay, so what news have you been following this week, Deb?
Yeah, so do you want the good news or the bad news first?
I'm always a bad news first kind of girl.
Okay, great. I think that's wise. So this week, something that stood out to me were news reports that Donald Trump has a new strategy for making home ownership more obtainable. But the strategy is extending the terms of mortgages to 50 years, which I don't know if you know this, but the average first-time home buyer today is 40 years old, which is part
Yes.
of the reason why he wants to fix this.
Up 10 years from just
Yeah.
10 years ago when it was 30, I
Yeah.
think.
Can you imagine paying your mortgage until you're 90 years old? And that's assuming
No.
you live that long. Most
That's
people
assuming you
don't.
live that long. I know.
So
Yeah.
that to me seems a little daunting, but according to most economists, if you take a $400,000 mortgage, put 10% down at the average interest rate of 6.25%, you're
Which,
only
by the way, is crazy that we're
yeah,
still there.
crazy. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. But you'd only lower your monthly payments by $250. Don't think it's any surprise that you would end up paying hundreds of thousands more in interest alone. So I think personal finance gurus, people like Dave Ramsey, would say this is a big no-no. But I think there's also some concern on the policy front because, again, the first thing I thought was after you're going to be paying your mortgage till you're 90 years old is think of all that money in interest that you could be putting towards your retirement. And of
Totally.
course, if people do not have a decent nest egg for their retirement, that means they're going to be more dependent on government programs like Medicaid and Social Security. So for me, that was a hard no. And I also think it's just a distraction from the problem. If we want to make home ownership more obtainable, let's stop throwing Band-Aids at the problem. I think Republicans and Democrats are both doing that. We'll talk about this with the shutdown, but that was my main issue with the subsidies. Let's get back to reversing the policies that got us into this mess. And I think the trade policies are one of those. And the big spending that Republicans and Democrats have done are one of the reasons why we're experiencing this pain.
Totally. And we just need to build more housing, right? We've made it harder
Mhm.
and harder and harder. And I think we have yet to recover from the kind of complete standstill that we came to after the mortgage crisis in 2008. We are low on housing stock in so many places where people want to live. And then we have, a very, very big population of boomers who are in homes now where they have paid off their mortgages and they don't want to move,
Mhm.
right? So they're not selling. So we're low on that housing stock too. So yeah, I agree with you. It's a problem and that is not the solution.
Yeah. Well, the good news is when Washington fails to do their job, the American people have shown this week that they'll really step up. I have been, quite frankly, blown away the past 2 weeks by the accounts that I've both read in the news, but also, more importantly, I've witnessed firsthand where people are standing up and standing in the gap for individuals who lost their SNAP benefits. I read so many stories. I think DoorDash announced they completed 1 million free deliveries in towns all across the U.S. Restaurants were giving away free meals. In Alabama, they dipped into the emergency funding, which is a good case for why we should have rainy day funds to provide money for SNAP recipients and food banks. And then, of course, there was that story that you and I both sent each other at the exact same time about that
Yeah.
Facebook neighborhood group launching a grocery buddy system. And it was really a welcome relief because ever since our local election, I have really tried to stay off Facebook because it has just become such a toxic place for dialogue. So I'm happy to see that some good came out of those groups. But for me, it's not just that meals and food were provided for these families, but I think it's the opportunity to show people that their neighbors and their community really cares for them. And so the personal ways in which they received that food, I think is really beneficial, and it's the way it should be done.
Yeah, I think it's a really great silver lining. It does generally make me angry in the context of the shutdown, but also just even absent the shutdown, that we live in the wealthiest country in the history of the world and that we cannot feed people. And to me, I deeply believe, and I know we kind of disagree on like a philosophical level on this kind of thing, but I believe that that is the role of the government, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with people paying more taxes to feed people who can't eat, whether it's because they are old, they are a single mom, whatever it is, whatever their story is. But it just makes me sad that we're in a place where people have to be doing this for their neighbors and they're not being taken care of. That being said, I do think that it is really nice to see people come together, particularly right now where people are so isolated and we've seen such a just breakdown in community. So I think that is a really excellent silver lining.
What have you got? What's catching your attention?
Yeah. Well, I went to lunch yesterday, and by the time I was done with lunch, a whole treasure trove of Epstein emails had been released, which is not what I was expecting. But for those who were just catching up on this in the same way that I was yesterday after a 1 hour lunch, Adelita Grijalva, who was recently elected in a special election in Arizona, was finally seated after waiting about 50 days to be sworn in. Speaker Johnson had refused to seat her, we can only assume, because she had said she would provide the critical 218th vote on the petition to compel the Department of Justice to release the Epstein investigation files. So that's where we are. A bunch of stuff came out yesterday. That vote still has not happened. So unclear exactly, what the timing was or where and where these emails came from. There's still a lot to pour through, but this initial batch makes it pretty clear that Epstein was under the impression that President Trump knew exactly what was going on in his home, which, of course, as we all know, was not always consensual and did not always involve adults. So what does it all mean? We're about to find that out. There are a number of House Republicans, Rep. Massey of Kentucky sort of being the most vocal, leading the charge among Republicans and saying that there are members of his party that he has their assurance that they will vote for this, even if they didn't support the petition, that they think this is the right thing to do. He was on TV saying, this isn't about the now. This is about, what happens in 2028 or beyond, and you're up for re-election, and, your opponent says you didn't do the right thing on this issue. So, it's very interesting to see that this is one of the few issues that's actually showing cracks among the otherwise MAGA faithful. And I guess we know what the line is now, right? It's not him shooting someone on Fifth Avenue, as he famously said during the first campaign. It's not arresting U.S. citizens in front of their children. It's not flirting with white nationalism, but it might be palling around with pedophiles. We will find out.
Yeah, I think we discussed this offline the other day. There really is no greater offense than the exploitation of humans, especially children. So I'm glad that politicians on both sides of the aisle are coming together and demanding transparency. I think I want to be very careful about reserving any judgment on this until we know the facts. I think a lot of times prematurely jumping to conclusions or going with our suspicions ultimately can harm not just the investigation, but justice for victims and kind of taint the legitimacy of it. So I'm withholding my judgment, my suspicions, but I say 1000%, let's see what they've got and go from there.
Yep. Well, we shall see. And the other thing that I'm paying attention to pretty closely here, as a lot of people know, we had an election a couple weeks ago, or I guess just last week, and we elected our next mayor here in New York City. And Zoran Mamdani has named his transition team his first deputy mayor. He's made some key announcements and key appointments. First fact that I wanted to point out is it's an all-female transition team, which I thought was really great. And so far, it's pretty full of government insiders. Lena Khan, previously the FTC, a Biden appointee, Dean Fulhan, who was previously the city's budget director. So, not exactly the parade of Marxists that Speaker Johnson was talking about or maybe hoping for, sort of a foil, but there's still time. Anything could happen. And the other thing that I've been looking at is the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, introduced what they're calling a Mamdani monitor as a sort of watchdog on the incoming mayor's positioning on anti-Semitism. And, for an organization that kind of tied itself in knots trying to excuse Elon Musk's Nazi salute, that kind of seems like an odd choice to me. But we'll see where this goes. I guess everybody is always looking for more signups to their newsletters. So maybe it's as simple as that. But, I will point out that there's been a lot of controversy over the incoming mayor's positions on Israel. I tend to think that has nothing to do with how we run the city, how we pick up the garbage, how we run our public schools. But understandably, given the times we live in, it's a big flashpoint, and it's something that people feel really strongly about. He was also, I believe, the only candidate who said that he would increase the budget for the anti-Semitism task force in New York City by 800%. So, maybe the ADL should take his word on that and hold him to it. But we'll see what happens.
We'll see. That should actually be the name of our podcast. We'll see.
We'll see. Wait
We'll
and
see.
see.
Wait and see.
Yeah.
I do think an all-female transition team is wise, considering it was really a group of women that got this government reopened again, and not just this time, but in 2013. So
Yep.
I don't know why we tend to wait oftentimes till the end to make that happen. It seems smart to go ahead and start off with that. Speaking of the government shutdown, we have some exciting news if you haven't seen yet.
You did it! Congratulations! Good job, everybody.
As you may know by now, 8 Democratic senators joined the Republicans to file for cloture. And what that means is end of debate. So for those who are not maybe familiar with Senate procedure, the Senate needs a 2/3 majority to end debate. So that's usually the big hurdle, right? You end debate, and then you can vote with a simple majority to pass or to not pass a bill. But that's why the filibuster exists. That's why a simple 51 majority in the Senate doesn't get you all that far. Senate rules are such that you need a 2/3 majority to end debate on an issue, which is why we hear about this critical concept of a Senate supermajority, right? But 8 Democrats said enough is enough. It's been the longest shutdown ever. People are hurting. Let's make a deal. And then that's exactly what they did. Worth noting that the immediate fallout was pretty mixed and not great among some Democrats. The thinking was that we've held out for this long, we've gained ground, we're holding this administration to accountable. The reality, of course, is that a lot of people were suffering, right? And particularly with this news that was not going to be paid out. And then that went to the courts, and it went back and forth a few times. And it was sort of being made into a political football. I think you had a number of senators say, my constituents are suffering, and I don't want to stand back and watch this happen any longer. So we had a vote last night in the House, and the government is back open for business. And that's where we are now.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that while a few provisions will expire in January, most of the provisions, including the SNAP funding, go for an entire year. And what was interesting to me, I mean, you touched on this a little bit, that they said enough is enough, but some senators pointed to the fact that they have committed to offer a vote on the healthcare subsidies in December. But Speaker Mike Johnson was not that committal. And so that was kind of an interesting, they really didn't get what they were looking for in any regards. I have to ask, if you were a member of Congress, would you have voted yes to reopen the government?
Oh, it's a great and unanswerable question. But I can tell you everything that would go into my calculus if I were there. I think, most critically is, what state do I represent, and what are the particularities and the realities on the ground in that state? I think, Nevada is a fairly SNAP reliant state, not quite as much as Oregon and some others that have been in the news. But I think there's probably a reason that both those senators felt the way that they did. What am I hearing from my constituents and from my most vocal constituents? You and I both know that those calls and those emails, they matter. They all go into a report every week that those members read, and that really does matter. And then, of course, the kind of the more political, strategic aspect, if you will, is, am I up for reelection in 2026? And I think that was a huge factor here, because among the 8, I think we have 2 or 3 who are retiring, and then all the rest, none of whom are up for reelection until 2028 or beyond. And so I think that gives them some political cover. And Another thing I think is worth mentioning is there's been a lot of talk about the base and the activists, and was this really about the healthcare subsidies, or was this about finding a way to fight back? And I think in some ways, making it about the healthcares was sort of a proxy for finding a way to fight back. And that energized people, made them felt like we were like the Democrats were doing something. But, at the end of the day, the Democrats who care about the most about fighting fascism and fighting back against this agenda and trying to make sure that ICE isn't arresting US citizens, those probably aren't people who can't afford to eat right now. Right? People who can afford to eat right now probably don't have time to be at a No Kings protest. That's, I think, the reality. And so that's kind of the calculus right now, is caring for people and trying to understand who is most vulnerable, while also projecting a united front and trying to fight back against this sort of central power grab by this White House. And that's, I think, what a lot of members are struggling with on the left.
Great job of not answering my question.
Yeah.
I'm just
Well,
joking.
I'm never going to be a senator anyway, so it's okay. Debbie, but I want to hear from you. Now that the shutdown is over, how have you seen Republicans message this plot twist, right? It kind of felt to a lot of people like it came out of nowhere. And I think it probably felt to a lot of the Democrats like it came out of nowhere, and that's why they were upset. Does it feel to you like they lost ground in the shutdown, as Dems were maybe counting on? And particularly as the narrative kind of moved away from the more complex issue of healthcare subsidies and towards things like SNAP benefits and the airport chaos, how do you think this has affected Republicans in Congress?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think this whole ordeal has been a textbook example of partisan politics at its absolute worst. It has quite literally been a messy, immature, wasteful food fight. But to answer your question, do I think they lost ground? Not at all. I think the fact that they were able to secure the votes needed in the Senate without giving any concessions substantiates this. Early on in the shutdown, and I'll pause and tell people that if you haven't listened to the Showdown episode we did a few weeks back, it's definitely still worth a listen. You'll get some good information on the back and forth of the policy. But I think early on, I conceded that Democrats were doing a great job of staying focused on one message. But I think that proved to be tricky to talk about providing relief for some Americans while others were missing paychecks. And I think when the SNAP funding came to a halt, the conversation shifted from simply debating whether we should subsidize some Americans' premiums to whether we should fight for these subsidies while people are missing their paychecks and losing access to food. And I think Senator Durbin said so as much in his floor remarks. He said, quote, "I cannot accept a strategy that wages political battles at the expense of my neighbors' paychecks or food for their children." And I'll admit, one area where I have been so disappointed by Republicans is the constant obsession over who is to blame for the shutdown.
Yes.
That is what the majority of the floor speeches were last night. I will give props to Steve Scalise because he did what I think Republicans need to do, which is quickly pivot away from this message of who's to blame and start engaging in an actual substantive debate on healthcare policy, because the midterms are less than a year away now. And they've really got to turn things around if they want to keep their seats.
Yeah, I mean, and my guess would be why you're seeing so many in the caucus hammer away saying Democrats are to blame, is because while you're absolutely right to say that no substantive gains were made, or like nothing changed, right, in this deal. Like the Democrats didn't really get anything of value. But I do think that if they are able to force a vote on the Obamacare premiums, which Thune has promised he would do. Now, he could totally reverse on that, because when the Republicans control the Senate, or whoever is in control of the Senate sets the agenda, right? So he could play nice and say he's going to do it and then not do it in the future. But, asking Republicans on this issue that has now also become a bit of a cleavage point. We were talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out and saying that she supports a solution here. And there are others who are saying we got to do something about this. I think that at the end of the day, asking Republicans to take a position in an up or down vote on these subsidies and then being able to run on that in 2026 is really what the Democrats wanted out of this. It's strategically, if they get what they want on that and the government has reopened and People can get their benefits, people can get their back pay, and hopefully we can have a uneventful Thanksgiving travel season for the American public at large. Maybe, from where I sit, that's kind of the best we could hope for at this point.
Yeah, and I think this is why I really want to see the Republicans go on the offense about this. I actually think Democrats could have made a major tactical error when they spent 2 months convincing everyone that Americans can't actually afford premiums under the Affordable Care Act. And honestly, I'm totally amazed that the Republicans didn't capitalize on this more.
You're right. And they're not proposing an alternative, right? I think that's worth noting too. Like they're not proposing some alternative fix. They're just saying, let's let them expire, which now the Democrats have framed as it's causing pain, right? So
yeah, and I obviously disagree with the Democrats on the solution, but
Right.
I agree that Republicans need to take action. We can't just keep talking about Obamacare's problems. We have to put forth real solutions. So I'm hoping they will do that next, but I just don't believe that a government shutdown was the time to address this. Again, I don't think we should be withholding paychecks and food and, a myriad of things to debate healthcare reform. There's a time and place for that. And I don't think it was today. Speaking of non-germane provisions in the spending package, I don't know if you saw, I would say the real plot twist in this whole drama was Rand Paul being opposed to the bill. And when I first saw that he was voting against it, I just assumed it was on the grounds that he wanted some sort of budget reforms to be included in the package so we don't find ourselves in this situation. But
Right.
nope, it was actually a little provision slipped in by his fellow Kentucky colleague, Mitch McConnell, that would ban the sale of any products with more than 0.3 milligrams of hemp. So basically, what does this mean for you? If you're a fan of the THC seltzers that you get in your store, you better go stock up because those will no longer be available in stores in states, including Alabama. Rand Paul obviously objected to this provision, and his concerns were for the farmers who will be put out of business, the manufacturers, as well as, again, the use of the appropriations process to ram through regulations unrelated to the spending package. He also argued that the federal action is unnecessary as many states have done their, quote, job to regulate the industry. And he offered an amendment to strip the provision. It failed. So as a result, he voted no on the package. But that was something that, honestly, it kind of amused me a little bit that somehow this emergency spending package became a debate about THC.
I mean, this one has me scratching my head, to be honest with you. I mean, I did like a quick glance at this one, and you've got, regulations changing on THC in beverages in Ohio, deep red state at this point. You've got hemp growers in North Carolina. I'm just so confused. This doesn't feel like a morality play, right? But I'm very befuddled by this one.
Yeah. And I think Rand Paul was right when he said, the reason why a lot of this was legal to begin with was from the Farm Bill a few years ago. And it's
Right.
really unfair to the farmers. I mean, I think I read it's like a 2 point something billion dollar industry. And we're just going to destroy the people that have invested in this based off of authorization that Congress gave them only a few years ago. So it's definitely bad procedure, if nothing else.
Yeah. It's bad procedure, and you're talking about farmers, you're talking about rural America, like you're talking about the Republican base. So again, really has me scratching my head.
Yeah. I will say, I think offering an amendment to overturn this provision was the right way to approach it, but for the same reasons I disagree with using the ACA subsidies as leverage, I don't agree with his decision to vote against the entire package over this provision.
Yeah. Fair. All right. Well, we wanted to have a little fun because we like to have fun. I think we're pretty fun. And we've done some fun kind of Q&A, get to know yous in the past. So this week we're going to do a little this or that.
I think we're fun.
We're super fun.
No fun
Come
person
on,
ever.
you go to a college football game like every weekend now. You're super fun. Okay, so we're going to do a little this or that. And I've compiled some, just column A, column B questions for you. And you just pick one. Don't overthink it. Okay?
Okay.
All right, you ready? Okay.
Yes, I think.
Swimming pool or beach?
Swimming pool.
Middle part or side part in your hair?
Well, for those of you watching on YouTube, you will see I have a side part.
I used to be a side part girly, and then when I was in the office with Gen Zers, they told me that side parts were for olds. And so
yeah, they are.
I went back to my middle part.
Or for people with giant foreheads like me.
You do not have a giant forehead. Okay, cats or dogs?
Cats. Or dogs that are like cats, like my 5-pound Maltese.
Fair. Save or spend?
spend.
Window seat or aisle seat?
Window seat.
Cookies or chips?
Chips.
Mariah or Whitney?
Whitney.
Yes. Okay. I knew you wouldn't fail me on that one. Inbox 0 or hundreds of unread emails?
Thousands of unread emails.
Yeah. It's your one or the other. It's not
And
both.
voicemails, yeah.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
HEB or Whole Foods?
GB. I love that you even know that.
I was like, I'm going to do a real Texas one here, but I did
it.
have to look up, is it pronounced Heb or HEB? And
Well,
then because
when people do pronounce it, it's Hebe.
Heb.
But yeah, it's HEB. And it's really their competitor to Whole Foods, Central Market. It is amazing. I know you said not to expand on this, but you get me going on
okay.
food and I can't stop.
That's fair.
Whole Foods in Austin, Texas is not like Whole Foods, at least in Alabama or Dallas or anywhere. Whole Foods in Austin, the mothership.
It's like the Mecca, right?
Yes, it has multiple restaurants in it. It's delicious. And I have never been more disappointed than when I went to the sad, hot food bar at my local Whole Foods and realized that it's really
Not
just
the same.
that. But to be fair, I don't have an HEB here, so I do shop at Whole Foods now.
I think it's funny that when you say it fast, HEB, it kind of sounds like KGB. Like, does that ever cause confusion? Am I the only one to notice that?
No,
That's
just
that doesn't
you.
cause confusion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Only you.
Uber or Lyft?
Uber.
Yeah. Halloween or Valentine's Day?
Valentine's Day for sure.
If you could have a superpower, would you want to read minds or be invisible?
Before you even presented the option, I was going to say read minds.
Definitely.
Obviously.
Yeah, clearly.
Like, I don't care if you don't like me. Just let me know so I don't waste my time on you.
Pie in the face or slip on a banana peel? We had to have something unsavory in there.
Pie in the face. You can lick it.
Perfect. Okay, so the toilet paper, is it over or under?
Over.
Like mullet or beard? Yeah.
Over. And we had this amazing nanny when Georgia was little, and she truly did absolutely nothing wrong except do the toilet paper the wrong way. And we would always laugh about how perfect she is, that the only fault we could find is in the direction.
That is funny. My husband, I don't feel strongly about this, but my husband feels like very strongly about this.
Well,
like,
what's his opinion on it?
Cardinal sin. Oh, same as you. It's got to be over.
Because if it goes under, it slides down.
You can't tear it the same way.
I don't know about you, but when I go to a public restroom, if there's any toilet paper hanging down, I rip it off and throw it in the trash because I just think about the particles that may have splashed.
Who has touched 100%. Yes, totally with you there. Okay, Netflix or Hulu?
You know, back in the day, Netflix, but they have just not been delivering anything. I don't think Hulu
is
has
an ascendancy
either. I don't know. I feel like at any given point, like only one platform is delivering at any given point. So that's why I like cancel and resubscribe all the time.
Fair. Clue or Monopoly?
I don't do board games.
No board games.
No.
All right. Abstain. Perfect world, no disease or no poverty?
Well, I guess no poverty, because if there's no poverty, you could use money to cure the diseases.
Yeah, fair.
I don't know.
Do you wish you had more money or more free time?
Well, I guess I answer that question just by practice, which is I clearly value free time over money because I don't have a paying gig right now.
Okay, and lastly, talking or listening?
I wish I was a better listener, but clearly it's talking. Hypocrisy at its finest here.
Well, that was great. You will have to, you'll get me next time.
Oh, for sure. You did use some of mine, though, so I'm going to have to become more creative.
All right. Well, I'm glad I did. There's always really good food ones to fall back on.
Yeah, I like ending with something positive. There was an interesting occurrence that happened this week, so I'm going to sound like a real boomer in this, but, we talked a lot about the algorithms last week, and this whole podcast situation has been a real learning curve, particularly on YouTube. I had never a day in my life watched YouTube Shorts. I didn't know that existed, but we now upload a lot of our clips to there. And so I've been really befuddled as to how some clips get 12 views and some get 1,200. And so I went on a deep dive. I told you I stayed up to like 1:30 the other morning trying to figure out how it all works out. And one of the recommendations from an influencer that I read was that if you don't actually engage on your account, that YouTube thinks you're a bot. So it's important to actually watch videos, like them. So I was up to like 1:30 doing that. And whenever I was looking at our Instagram account from my account, I thought this is a totally alternate universe than
Yeah.
what I experienced. I mean, it was the most Instagram has us pegged that we want bipartisanship. Everything is great. Everyone's listening. And I thought, man, if everybody was scrolling through our news feed, they would be in such a better mood.
Yeah.
And
Everything's great and we all
yeah.
love each other.
But the thing that's so great about Instagram is it's great and bad, right? It's an endless supply of videos. But what stood out to me is that the same organizations and sources kept coming up because it turns out there aren't a lot of
Turns out there is a limit.
there is a
how
limit to
much-
the number of
Yeah.
people doing bipartisan stuff. But I was really encouraged, I think, especially in light of the protests that were happening at Berkeley this week with the Charlie Kirk's organization having their last seminar. There is an organization called Bridge USA, and it is similar to Turning Point in the fact that it's targeting college campuses, but their mission is to fight against political division. There's 108 chapters in 41 states
Wow.
where students are coming together and having constructive dialogue and encouraging diversity and viewpoints. And so I just wanted to point that out because I think it's easy to get kind of bogged down in the negative news, but there is good to be had. And I would encourage people to kind of look into that more and see if there's some way that you can help and spread the good news here.
Yeah. Bridge USA, check them out. All right, well, Congress did it. We did it. They ended the shutdown. We covered the end. Lots to talk about, as always. We are going to be sharing some more stuff on social media, so check it out. We will add some of the news stories that we've been talking about to our stories so you can follow along. Some of the news that we're highlighting or reading, we've heard really great feedback from people that they are excited to hear more about what we've been paying attention to. And so we're going to share all that so you can do the same.
Yes, send any tips, questions, suggestions. We love to hear it.
As always.
See you next time.